Hi everyone, it's Sam from the Danger Planet, and today I am once again joined by Brady
Reporting for duty.
and Mike.
Ready to rock.
We're continuing our Horus Heresy series, and today we're going to be talking about the Solar Auxilia. So, the Solar Auxilia is going to be the first of the entries we're doing in the Liber Imperium. Now, this book just released, and it's pretty cool because unlike all the previous books, this doesn't deal with Space Marines. It deals with all of the other forces that were fighting for the Emperor during the Horus Heresy. And this book includes the Solar Auxilia, it includes the Adeptus Custodes, and it includes the Sisters of Silence, along with some individual weirdos like the Assassins. So we're going to be starting today with the Solar Auxilia, which I think is really cool because it's an army that doesn't really have a totally clean analog in the world of 40k. But the Solar Auxilia were basically the elite of the regular human Imperial army. So, Brady, why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of the background of the Solar Auxilia and what you should expect when you start reading about these guys?
Yeah, you're gonna be getting more of those human stories, as well as kind of how that guard is forming, because you are gonna see there is some analog. You are gonna see the Leman Russ battle tank. You're going to see some of those things you know and love from the more mechanical side, but then from the more human side, you're gonna see void reinforced armor, so they can get in those big giant Imperial class cruisers and go slam into another giant Imperial class cruiser, get out and start fighting in the void of space, which is like really really cool, especially when it's just their normal people.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of their inclusion in the heresy, as it lets you build and play kind of the mortal armies. And if you look at the book, one of the first things they say is it's the iron heart of the Imperial army. This is kind of that center point of the human mortal forces. They say that they are pretty much second only to the Space Marines. Obviously, there's a pretty big distance between those two, but it gives you a chance to play something a little different, and they are pretty elite in style and how they play, despite being massed in large numbers compared to Space Marines. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of character to these, and definitely changes up the game a little bit when you're playing, just Space Marine, which we all love. But this gives a nice little change up for you.
All right, it sounds like there's a lot of really cool narrative options here. Now, when we get into the rules and the mechanics of them, I think there's two rules we really need to talk about right from the start. And the first one is tercios. Now, that's something that none of the Space Marines really have an equivalent to, but a tercio basically is several squads together form a tercio. It's almost like a platoon or a section. And when you have a tercio and one of the squads makes a reaction, all of the other ones in that squad basically get to make the same reaction as long as they're in formation, which just means they need to be within 3 inches of another unit. Now that seems like a really, really strong rule. It's kind of defining how the army plays. Is that pretty much accurate, Mike? Would you say that's like a building block of how these guys play out?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's some variations to how they play. You don't have to really focus on this, but I think you're really missing out if you don't. And as we'll talk through it, you'll see there's a tertio kind of for every option, being, you've got the command, Veletaris, their veterans, their rifle section, their basic infantry. And as you continue going, tanks, artillery, all along across the board. And platoon is a great example. If you know anything about kind of the old style play of guardsmen, this kind of is similar to it. But the biggest thing that I like about this rule that I'm going to point out is that they react together. If you stay in formation, which I believe is 3 inches, the unit is within 3 inches of another unit from its tertio, they react together. So just imagine all those las guns firing all at once in reaction to some Space Marines. That's a lot of flashlights.
What I also really like about it is it allows you to get a lot more models, because how you'd really, you're paying about 8 to 10 points per Solar Auxilia individual. She's like, well, how am I going to get all these dudes into my force organization? So what this also allows you to do is take 3 units of 10 and go, okay, this is actually 1 unit of troops. So it'll that's where you're really going to see how you're going to fill up your detachment slots in a really interesting way that rewards you for playing in that defensive style to get the reactions. But if you don't want to do that, you're not punished. It just allowed you to fit into your force organization.
All right, Tercio sound like pretty cool building blocks for this list. It reminds me a little bit of the old Imperial Guard army construction rules from like 3rd and 4th edition. Now, the other thing that I think is pretty unique about these guys is cohort doctrines. Now, my read on cohort doctrines, and you can correct me here, is that they function a little bit like rights of war, where you're sort of picking a theme and then your whole list gets modified and you have some restrictions placed on you, but you also get some bonuses. Is that about accurate, Brady?
Yep. You get a lot of options because obviously you don't have access to any of the generic Space Marine rights of war, so they do have to put a lot of unique ones. A lot of them are a lot smaller in terms of overall effects. You're not seeing anything that's going to really fundamentally change your game plan like some of the Space Marine ones do. But all these options are really good and can really change, especially like, hey, I'm going to change where my tanks are going so I can put even more tanks into my list.
I think Brady hit it right on the head there. He's right there. You won't see the exact amount of flavor that you may see from the Space Marine Legions, but you're definitely going to get a style for how you build your army, how it feels, and how it plays on the tabletop from the cohorts. Rights of War is the best way to put them. They're just a little more broad stroke, I would say, but they definitely give you a nice feeling to your army, and they have some decent abilities. And some of them are actually pretty fun. When we get into them in a little more detail, there's actually a lot of interesting quirks you can get out of them.
All right, well, so looking at the cohorts, I don't think we're going to talk about all 8 of them exhaustively because 8's a lot, but I'm noticing there's some cool ones. There's one that lets you play basically Ultramarines allies, which is pretty cool. There's obviously one that's a bunch of tanks. There's one that lets you take robots. That's pretty sweet. So, Mike, do you have like a favorite cohort or two? One or two that you really, really like and that you think really kind of make the list play in a unique and fun way?
So, as I said, they all kind of give a nice different quirk to it. I mean, Solar gives you this veteran kind of drop troop feel. Ultimar is that mass-bodied, mass infantry line. And so forth and so on. You can get high on the leadership with reborn cohorts. For me, I really like the feral pattern and the siege pattern. So I would run the siege pattern because I like artillery. This gives me a chance to re-roll that scatter dice using those blast weapons. Helps make artillery, which is a little lackluster this edition, which is fine, but gives you a little more reason to bring those basilisks or medusas. Definitely the quad guns and the battle cannon for the Leman Russ. In addition, I just think it's hilarious. The feral pattern cohorts, they cause fear 1 for 25 points per model, and they have counterattack. There's just something about that, you know, regular humans potentially scaring Space Marines that just warms the cackles of my heart. So those are probably my 2 favorite, but as I said, there's a lot of fun options in here that you could really play with.
To even add to the feral, because feral was one I was looking at a lot, but you are always considered a mistrusted ally. I believe it's mistrusted if you were with a loyalist Space Marine, and I play loyalist right now, so it's like, oh, these are just raving bad men. They can be modeled very well as like a cultist or a proto-cultist, which actually kind of leads to the penal pattern cohorts, which are the kind of your proto-guard. You're giving them las guns. You're giving them the more 40k type weapons. Because these are not your elites. These are your prisoners, and they just need them to fill their ranks, and they're going to push them forward. So you can kind of see that 40k guard style starting to creep its way in, where that like value of life and that value of a sophisticated military is starting to go away because they just need to throw bodies into the war machine.
I do think it's kind of cool that the brave, men and women of the Imperial Guard in the 41st millennium are basically prisoners in the 31st millennium. It's kind of how far humanity's fallen. So that is kind of a neat little touch. So now we've kind of gone over the cohorts a little. Let's start talking about the units. Starting with the HQs, it kind of looks like there's really one character option as an HQ, Legate Marshal. This is pretty much who is going to be leading your army. So, Brady, what's the advantage of a Legate Marshal? Is this somebody you basically just take every game and don't really think too much about? Is he sort of a tax you pay? What's the deal with this guy?
Yeah, so this is going to be one of those areas where it depends if you're taking them as a full, or if you're taking them as an allied detachment. If you're taking them as a full, you start your list every time with this. They unlock your cohort. This is basically your Praetor, and they're very good, so you're going to take them 100% of the time. If you're taking them as an allied detachment, I don't think he's as useful. If you still want the cohort, you need to take him. You don't actually have an option in that regard. But if you're taking as an allied detachment, I do not believe he's as mandatory.
I have to agree, and to add a point, the only time you don't have to take him necessarily is if you're taking the armored, the tank cohort. It lets you take a command tank, and it gives you the cohort ability. But this guy actually has some pretty good options as far as he's stubborn, he's battle hardened, which is unique. He's pretty survivable. You can give him a cyber familiar as well, a paragon blade, and he's a weapon skill 5. So he's not exactly a chump either. He's going to give a lot of Space Marines a run for their money in combat, depending how you kit him out. So he's a decent model to bring. He's not too pricey. Yeah, you start adding stuff up, he'll get there. But if you want to take a cohort, he's an auto take, and if you can throw him with the right unit, he's gonna kill some people. I mean, with a Paragon blade and a Archeotype pistol, he's nothing to shake your nose at.
And it looks like there's sort of an alternative option if you don't want to have the Legate Marshal. There's this Command Tercio. So that's kind of interesting. It's basically one, command squad and then up to two bodyguard squads. So when would you choose to take that over the Legate Marshal, Mike? Or do you think you'd take both?
I think list build is dependent here. It doesn't hurt to take both. The companions are halfway decent. But the big thing that you get out of this, I think Brady will touch on it more because he needs it for his list, is this where you get that command box. And as you look at this army, the command box brings a lot to the table for the Solar in general. So this gives you that chance. It lets you get it in there. You can put the Marshal with this unit. He's an independent character, so he can go with, the Command Tercio. You can throw him in with another squad if you think so. So this is a decent take, though. If you want to get that command box in there, you're going to have to take some sort of Command Tercio to get it either way. Or, if you look at the rifle section, I think they have a command section as well. And that's how you get that command box. And that's really necessary. And I think that's important for this army.
Yep. For me, the command box is not an optional upgrade, even with if you're running it as an allied or a main. When you go and take your command box, your leadership 9, and that projects leadership 9 to everyone on the board who you spend 5 points, which you will, to give them, I cannot remember the name of that upgrade, the box interlock. And so essentially all your troops will be leadership 9. This happens if this commander is in a transport or in reserves. So you're going to keep this person reserves and hidden as long as you possibly can. They're actually they are T3, so they will get instant deaths, but they are 2 and 3 wounds. So you can load up on a lot of his Auxilia companions and actually be fairly durable, all things said and done. But yeah, you're going to want to take him if you run any amount of infantry, or your infantry basically are going to take 2 or 3 bolter wounds and start running. Well, at leadership 9, they're not going to start running very easily.
All right, so it sounds like they both have something to recommend them. So now let's get into the first of the actual, the true tercios that are making up the game. And we're going to start with the elites, the Veletaris Tercio. Who are these guys? What is exactly a Veletaris, and what makes them different from your ordinary guy, Brady?
Well, the biggest thing that they're carrying your elite heavier weapons. They have a better ballistic seal. They're shooting just as well as a Space Marine. They're fighting just as well as a Space Marine. Even at Initiative 4. These squads are bringing your Volkite, their roto cannons, or the axes, the storm axes. I really like these guys just to run them fairly cheap in a transport and just stick a bunch of Volkite, because at about 8 to 10 points a model, they're a fairly cheap source of Volkite, even for a Space Marine player, and Volkite is still Volkite when you're shooting it at weapon skill 4, or ballistic skill 4, my apologies.
Yeah, I think this is, for a lot of Solar Auxilia armies, it's worth having at least one of those tertios. If you're running the Solar cohort, obviously you're going to bring a lot of them. But one of the things I like to point out with these guys, Brady already touched upon the Volkite, and the Volkite's great. It's a good addition. It does a lot of, especially as he said at that ballistic skill 4. I love the Storm Axes. It's a squad of 20 of these guys, and their big transport. The axe is +2 strength, AP2. It is still unwieldy, but it has Murder Strike 6. It's actually better than the average Space Marine Power Axe, which I think is just such a fun threat to bring out to the table. Throw your Marshal in with them, get them into a transport, and throw a Medicae in there, and you have yourself a pretty durable and pretty killy unit in combat for a human army.
All right, so we went through the Veletaris. It looks like going through the elites, there's a few other options, and the next one's going to be the doctors. So I'm looking at these Solar Auxilia Medicae sections. This, to me, kind of just basically looks like an apothecary that you'd put in a squad. But then next to them, we've got Surgeon-Primus Aevos Jovan, a special character who actually just very recently went back up for a reorder after being out of print for a long time. So what's this guy like? Do you think it's worth it to take the doctors if you're playing a bunch of humans, assuming that they're just gonna die, right? But does this maybe give them a little bit more durability, Mike?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're given anything that you can give a feel no pain to is worth it. And again, just the regular Medicae section is 15 points. I see no reason not to bring as many as you can. Stick them into your Veletaris specifically. They're gonna be great. And yeah, the Surgeon-Primus he's got a lot of fun things to bring to the table. I'm not gonna dig too deep into him necessarily, but he's worth bringing. He adds a little flavor. Not to mention, the guy is fearless, which I think is hilarious. But he does bring some flavor to the army. But the Medicaes themselves, absolutely. I'm not going home. I'm not leaving home without them.
I'm a little less high on the Medicaes. They're certainly not bad. But you won't get that 6-up Feel No Pain on instant death. And unfortunately, a lot of guns are going to start getting into that instant death threshold. But again, at 15 points, not super bad. The only other problem I have with them is I want to take a lot of transports, and they didn't get the Rhino treatment where you get to get a transport capacity of 11 or 12. Most of them tend to be transport capacity 10. So you start getting a little limited in your actual overall survivability, because you're not going to get to put them in the transport. But I will kind of bring up here, because I don't think we mentioned it earlier. The 4-up armor save actually goes a lot further than it did in the previous edition. Like, a lot of guns are actually like AP 5 or are already wounding and killing a Space Marine with the AP 3. So like, you'll actually find your dudes getting a 4-up save a lot more often than you'd expect them to.
Well, that's good to hear for the survivability of the guard. You don't want them to just get hosed off the table. Now that we've gotten through the medics, but it looks the next entry is another thing I think is really cool and unique. These Charonite Ogrins. It looks like a Charonite is basically biochemically and cybernetically altered, so they're kind of like halfway between an Ogryn and a Servitor, and there's just these big, deadly, crushing berserkers. And the models, I have to say, are super cool and super menacing. Brady, are these guys worth taking? Do you think you'd always want to throw some Charonites in there?
For Rule of Cool, probably. I am not sure, like, you're paying Terminator points for them. But on the same side of it, they run at you and are cool, and do a lot of, and can do a lot of damage. It's just really making sure you can get there. That can be a little bit of the problem at a 40-point model that is only a 4-up save.
Yeah, considering that you technically don't have a dedicated transport for them. However, they have a Feel No Pain 5 up. They are Tough 5, Strength 5, Hammer of Wrath 2, Rage 2, Death Frenzy. So they have some fun and they have some use, but I would definitely say opponent dependent for a lot of these guys. I can't say they'd be my first choice to bring against a army like Iron Warriors, but I could see some good reason to bring them against combat armies. They give you a little more threat to getting into combat. So they have some value there for sure, but exactly as Brady said, for that 4-up, walking them across the board has its risks.
To just jump in real quick, the Ogryn and the Stormaxes, I think, are the two that I'd really think about a lot more if I was running this as my primary army, and think about a lot less if I was running them as an allied detachment.
That makes sense, because if you're running this as an allied detachment, chances are whoever your primary detachment is going to be a lot better in melee than a bunch of humans. All right, so let's talk about the troops now. This is the basic building block of the Solar Auxilia. So we've got the Infantry Tercios, and they come with, it looks like, a few different types of Tercios, but they also come with a few different types of transports. So I guess we'll talk about the Tercio first, and then we'll talk about their transports. So Mike, what do you have to say about the Tercios?
So when it comes to the Infantry Tercio, I think there's a lot of value here for these guys. And I think the thing that you have to pay attention to is that close order rule. And what that kind of gives the advantage to is using heavy weapons. Their basic las rifle is heavy, so that's a point to play out. So using the close order rule to be able to move that half distance and still shoot those heavy weapons at full ballistic skill is something to pay attention to. And that las rifle has two different options, one of which being at strength 6. So there's some good value to these weapon systems that they can bring as a base infantry. But otherwise, you are looking at basically humans. And you've got your 1 wound, tough, strength 3, but there are bodies that you can build. So they come at squads of 10. But you can buff them up to 20, and you can bring quite a few of them. I think they're a lot of fun. I will definitely be running at least 30 of these guys, if not more.
I come from this on the other side, and again, this is me primarily running it as an allied detachment. For 110 points, which is really actually your first squad's going to be 120, because you're going to give it the Vox Interlock and a Augury Scanner. And then you just stick 2 more next to them at another 110 points or 115 points each, because they're all going to have their Vox Interlock. But for about 345 points, if a Space Marine player dares to shoot them like, oh, I'm going to have my tac squad just take some pot shots at 24 plus inches, like if you can get in that 30-inch band, you're going to return fire with, 120 shots. So they are not going to want to come near them. And if you're just deep striking something near them and you come within 18, that's a lot of shots at that blast charger, that 18 is strength 4 or strength 6. So you can actually do a lot of damage with that massive group reaction, and you get to throw a fistful of dice, which you don't get to do as often. So win-win for me.
That sounds fun. Let's talk about those transports though, because they seem pretty cool. I'm not really familiar with the Dracosan. What is exactly a Dracosan? Brady.
This is my bad.
Yeah, Brady. What is a Dracosan?
It's their Terminator equivalent, or not Terminator. Sorry, it's their Land Raider equivalent. It's their bigger one. It can fit a lot more capacity. This one is a capacity 22. I haven't looked at it super much because it's a lot of points for something that will die immediately, and I definitely look more towards their Rhino equivalent.
It is something that I probably only bring one of. Currently thinking of running this as a main army. I will have one. So the benefit here to this, it does get a flare shield, and you can upgrade its Gravis Las Cannon at the cost of capacity. I think it drops it by half. You can bring a Demolisher Cannon, which can be a lot of fun for a transport But it is a pricey transport to bring for, again, something that is front armor 13, side 12. Even with that flare shield and 5 hull points, you are risking seeing it go pretty quick.
All right, so it looks like we're looking more at the other transports. Then we got the Aurochs, which looks a little bit like a rhino, and then an Arvis is, I guess, like a flying rhino. Mike, which of those would you think you'd take? Would you ever take like the actual flying transport? Because you don't see those very often in 40k, even though they do exist.
So I would absolutely take the Arvis if I had planned to run the Solar, I think it's the Solar cohort, because it allows you to take him as a dedicated transport, and it gives you that drop troop feeling. However, it doesn't really shoot. It's just there to get your guys to where they're going. The Aurochs is essentially a rhino. It's like the old school rhino in that it has a capacity of 10, just like Brady said. It is pretty quick with a movement of 15, but it goes down pretty fast. However, I would like to say throwing the multi-laser on these, and if you are running any of the cohorts that requires you to take a dedicated transport, the multi-laser, I think, is 6 shots. So adding that to your already abundance of shooting from your rifle cohorts is a nice addition to have. I plan on running these with my infantry because I'm going to run probably the siege cohort, and I absolutely plan to put a multi-laser on it, and it's just an additional weapons platform for a very cheap cost. I think it puts it up to 40 points.
Yeah, this is less points efficient than a Rhino, just because a Rhino, you're transporting Space Marines, which cost a lot more points. But the Aurochs is just absolutely fantastic in terms of protecting your very squishy individuals, because they are still T3, even though that 4-up save goes a lot further. And again, movement 15, this thing can move around. It can move block to make charges a little bit harder as well, which is always really valuable and important. I really want to like the Arvis, but kind of to Mike's point, it is, I think, the only vehicle I've ever seen in like all of Warhammer that doesn't also just have a gun strapped somewhere to it and has no option to strap a gun to it. So it drops the people down and then flies around with a searchlight, I guess. It's just a little bit too much for what it's for having not even just a las gun on it.
That's all right. So let's look at some of the other flyers though. They've got lightnings and they've got thunderbolts, and it looks like the lightning is a little bit heavier. The thunderbolt is maybe a little bit of a lighter transport. So what's the difference between these two really? What do they do, and when would you take one over the other?
I kind of dislike both of these, to be perfectly honest. The Thunderbolt is the one I prefer a lot more because it does have the Xiphon intercepting rule, which is just really useful. And you get a few more guns for less cost. The Lightning is weird in terms of it can get really strong, but it's already more expensive, and then you continue to have to pay more points for all its guns. It almost feels like they switched the weapon options are the wargear on these two and just like didn't account for it somewhere. Because you're paying more for everything on the Lightning, and you don't even get the intercept of the Thunderbolt. So I don't see any reason really to not take the Thunderbolt or take the Lightning over the Thunderbolt.
I have to agree. I actually am sad that they didn't add the Avenger in here, because I'm a big fan of that and its giant Gatling gun. But of the two, yeah, I agree. I'd probably go with the Thunderbolt, because if I really want to, I could keep it pretty bare bones and it still would have an effect that I want it to, being that it can intercept other flyers, and it has a las cannon, it has an auto cannon, so it's viable. The Lightning, it has more speed, but it is front armor 11 versus 12, and Brady's right. You have to put a lot of extra points into it to really get it to a value that's worth that 150 points starting out, and at that junction, I don't know if I'd really want to spend that many points on a fairly light flyer that if anybody decides to bring flak missiles, you're probably going to take it down.
All right, well, we've eaten our vegetables. It's time for our dessert. This is the thing everyone really loves about playing the Guard. It is tank time. So let's talk about those Armored Tercios. It's kind of astonishing to me when I first read this that they get everything in Tercios, even tanks. So what's going on with the Armored Tercio? It looks like it's mostly made of Leman Russ strike squadrons and assault squadrons. So what are the differences between those? When would you maybe want one over the other? And generally, are tank tercios something you want to be taking, Mike?
Absolutely. I definitely plan on bringing one. Personally, I like the strike. The Vanquisher cannon. So the difference here is that you get different weapon options, and the strike can outflank. So yes, you can outflank your Leman Russ tanks. I would definitely take a command tank as well, because it does give you access to a Cognis Signum. And then the strike tanks give you the Vanquisher cannons that can outflank. These things come with Brutal now. They're great weapon systems. I don't want to leave home without them personally. But if you head over to the Assault Squadron, you're just getting a different set of weapons. This one does give you a chance to get the Demolisher cannon, the Executioner, which I know is, a big favorite for a lot of people, the Volkite Macro Saker. So if you want to go a little heavier on the weapons, you go with the Assault. If you want to go for the Vanquisher cannon personally, or light weapon systems and outflanking, then you take the Strike. Again, personally, I'm a fan of the Strike. The Assault is more expensive as well, 200 points versus 150 points.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Assault as well, because again, in Heresy, how you're really running those tanks is in those squadrons, because killing one tank really isn't that hard. We've all seen a lot of people are running those heavy las cannon squads. So coming in this situation, you can run 9 tanks in one, essentially, one heavy support slot, or 9 Leman Russes. So that's going to start adding up real quick. I think you're going to see a lot of Leman Russ, either allied or main, as main army, because the Leman Russ battle tank, as its strike squadron, all its guns are good, and it's a very efficient platform for what you're getting. I still think you can even get some value out of the Assault Squadron. Probably not with the Demolisher. I think the Space Marines can just get a better version cheaper, and I'm not super in love with the Demolisher cannon in general, even on Space Marines. So I think you would be taking that Volkite Macro Seeker or the Plasma Cannon.
All right, so now we've gotten through the big beefy tanks. Let's talk about the long range tanks, the artillery tanks. Now I know that artillery in Space Marines is not awesome. Is there any reason to take the artillery in the Solar Auxilia? It looks like it's a combination of basilisks and then these tarantula sentry batteries and rapier batteries. Brady?
Sorry. I don't think they're bad. I think it suffers from the same problem that the Space Marine artillery pieces do. They didn't suddenly give them infinitely better guns, but they are still fairly cheap, especially the rapier batteries. I actually like them in Space Marines because they're fairly cheap to get some fairly good guns, but with a lot of downsides. And I think the downsides here are a lot less because you're going to be running so much more stuff, and they're cheaper. So I at least think that the rapier batteries are very much worth looking into. But also, I tend to lean more towards running more boots on the ground than big, heavy tanks, where I'm a little bit less excited about things like the Malcador Heavy Tank Squadron, which is the next section. I apologize.
For me, so I think Brady's right here. A big advantage is the rapiers. They are fairly cheap. You get some good weapon systems out of them. Obviously, you get the same options, essentially, that the Space Marines do. The only difference is you don't get Phosphex, but you still get Incendiary, Shattered, Splinter for the quad guns themselves, and then you can still access the Laser Destroyer or the Gravis Heavy Bolter if you want. As far as the tanks themselves, I'm going to take them, but they definitely are still priced pretty high for what they do. And it is as it is, but you're still getting 200 points. And I know those guns aren't as good as they used to be, but I plan on running them because I can reroll that scatter dice. I think that's valuable. And again, I'm going to be taking a good number of them. Lastly, though, once we have kind of discussed about the tertios in general, but this is a good chance for you to get that, command vox in there if you don't take a command tertio for any reason. The other artillery command section does give you that command box you can get out there, which is a nice little touch. which I highly recommend. But as far as it goes, I'm excited to see how it runs. I plan on trying to make it work and see if I can get these big guns to work again. But I think the value for most players is those rapier batteries.
All right, so now we've talked about the tanks, so it's time to talk about the tanks. The really big guys. The Malcador is our first one. It's a heavy tank, and it looks like it's about a bit bigger than a Leman Russ, but smaller than a Baneblade. Kind of a bit like the Rogal Dorn tank that they actually just previewed for 40k. Malcador feels like it kind of sits in that exact slot. So, Mike, is the Malcador something you'd be interested in taking at some point?
I realized that I talked about the Basilisk, and that wasn't in that section. I'm sorry. So, Sam, to answer your question with the Malcadors, they are fun. I've seen them played before. I've seen them played in Old Guard and Old Renegade armies. And it is definitely a fun thing to bring. Front side 13 armor, 5 hull points, and some variation to weapons. But again, if you're not big into the Demolisher cannon, that is one of the things that it can take. But it comes, kitted out with a lot of options for weapons. So it can do a lot of damage, but I think you're going to see it pop pretty quick when you decide to bring one. However, it is reinforced. It is something to mention, and independent fire control. That's one of the few units that gets it. So I think you can find value to bringing it if you really like the model. It's not going to be one of my go-tos, but it's definitely worth looking into.
So I think this is where I get a little, not doom and gloom, but I look at this army, and Tercio is such a powerful rule, and so integral to how this army is going to work. Okay, for one heavy support slot, I can take one Malcador tank, or I can take 3 Leman Russ. And this is also why I think the Leman Russ, you're going to see so much more of them, is because you can take them in those squadrons. And yes, you can take you can take up to 2 additional Malcador tanks. You can have that squadron, but losing that Tercio is just going to really hurt it, in my opinion. So I look at those and go, what more are they going to give me for losing that Tercio? And kind of to Mike's point, I don't think I gain a whole lot, because it will just get popped, and I could just take a Leman Russ for 25 points less and take a lot more of them and start getting more leverage out of that rule.
Makes sense. So we've already discussed the Basilisk a bit when we talked about the artillery section. And so moving past that one, we got some other kind of cool, very unique little tanks that are not maybe something you'd be familiar with if you play 40k exclusively. So the Valdor Tank Destroyer. It's got a neutron beam laser. That thing is extremely cool, Brady. Is it actually worth taking? Because it is very cool.
So I actually think this is probably one of the few I would consider. One, because you do have that historical, you hide your tank behind the hill and it pops up and just obliterates a tank coming forward. And that neutron beam laser is no joke. Ordnance 2, concussive 3, shock pulse. It does get hot, but if you point this thing at another vehicle, it's probably going to kill it. And you can or you can even put it at a dreadnought. It won't kill the dreadnought because you're not getting all of the extra damage from brutal, because you don't have it. But concussive 3, if they do fail their check, if you can find any way to lower that leadership to make that check a little bit harder, that will start mattering. Unfortunately, that's very hard to do on a fearless model. But it is a really, really cool tank, so I'll probably still end up finding a way to run it, even if it's not the most powerful.
Yeah, I have to entirely agree here. If I was going to kind of break the mold of the Tercios, outside of the Basilisk itself or Medusa, it would be the Valdor Tank Destroyer. I'm a big fan of that, the mounted neutron laser as well. You don't get to see it very often. There are a couple options the Space Marine can bring it, but it is a scary weapon system. It's worth seeing on the battlefield. Yeah, 250 points, but I think if you're really looking for that anti-vehicle, or even something that's going to go kind of after some bigger vehicles, this is the way to go, in my personal opinion. At least it's an option. And again, 5 hull points isn't always the best. It's better than nothing, but this is probably the most comparable to other kind of Space Marine tanks in certain regards. So that kind of gives its value as well. The only downside for me is the ballistic skill 3.
Ooh, that is kind of rough. So we've talked about the big tank. Let's talk about a little teeny tiny tank. The Cyclops Demolition section. I love these models. These things are adorable. But, like, what do they actually do? Mike.
They are kind of interesting little concept. I haven't read too deep into them. If I remember correctly, as a demolition vehicle, I think it just explodes. You guys might have to.
That is in fact what it does.
Okay, so it does the same thing as when I had him for Krieg. If you liked squigs in old 40k for orcs when they would just run out and kind of blow up, this is the unit for you. It has that same feeling. You're just going to throw it out there. It's going to either die or kill something. Either way.
Or die and kill something.
Yeah, which is its goal, which is what you want for it. And at 35 points for a laugh, I mean, it's I can see some value to it. I would bring it on occasion just to shake things up.
Yeah, it is. The actual rule for demolition. You know, you don't roll to hit if you're in base contact. You automatically remove yourself as a casualty, but it's a strength 10, AP 1, melee armor bane, instant death, brutal 2 hit. Honestly, I feel like they could have gone a lot higher on this ability. I love it. I love it to pieces. But like, throw brutal 4 on it. Like, you know, you're taking your little vehicle and blowing it up. It's a really obvious thing. They see it coming. Put some big brutal number on here, and I want these things wheeling out to go fight a Primarch. I want Dorn running away because there's 6 of these running at him. I don't have to roll to hit or wound. I just, you know, or I do have to roll the wound, but I don't have to roll to hit you. I just have to run these things at you.
Yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if you don't take these things, you're a big coward. This is the tank for winners. So now we're going to actually return briefly to the Malcador. And this one's a little bit odd because the Malcador we talked about earlier was just a regular heavy support. And the Malcador Infernus is a Lord of War, despite appearing to have exactly the same chassis. Now, I'm not sure if that's, you know, a typo or whatever, but it's kind of neat. It's got that, like, enormous Inferno cannon. Is that something you'd ever take, Brady?
Probably. Hellstorm is always a good rule. Strength 8, so it'll instant death. You know, you have your torrents. It, like, at 300 points, I had to double check its points because I thought it was more expensive than this, and why I haven't like really considered taking it. But like, that's a good little weapon for killing Space Marines. Like, you know, that will really pick up an entire squad of anything with armor value 3. It will have a hard time picking up Terminators, which I think is probably your biggest problem, is you're going to spend a lot of points to kill Space Marines, which a lot of things can already do. But if you want to have that really fun flamer feel, like, I don't think you can do better than this.
I think you can find a spot for it. As I said, it is a good, halfway decent Space Marine killer. It does have that breaching 6 as well, concussive. And then you can obviously kit it out with all the sponson weapons. Pintle, it does come with a flare shield. So you can get some value out of this vehicle. Again, is it going to be my go-to? Probably not. But if you really like the Malcador model, this is a good one to go for. It will be a huge threat to Space Marines, in my opinion, particularly a high volume, you know, power armor army. I agree the Terminators are going to be a little rougher and have some difficulty. Yeah, the strength 8, if you do end up getting 1 or 2 through, you know, that's great. That's a Terminator or 2 dead. But this is definitely a threat for those power armor individuals and those power armor heavy armies.
All right, and then last but not least, definitely not least, we've got the biggest boy of all, the Stormhammer, which it's kind of weird that this is the one super heavy, because I know that there's like a million different Bane Blades, and they're called like the Bane Hammer, Stormhammer, Stormblade, like Bane Strike, whatever. There's a lot of these different super duper heavy ones. But the Stormhammer, what does this do? It's 500 points for a massive tank. Mike, do you ever go big tank? Do you ever go full tank?
I mean, I don't see any reason not to go full tank. But this was kind of an interesting choice. I agree. I mean, it does have 12 hull points, but you're, again, at that ballistic skill 3. So this wouldn't be a bad one to bring with the with the siege rule. But then again, if you're scattering with this thing, it doesn't really matter that much. It is the Massive Blast template, but that's about, and it's AP3. Those are really the two things going for it. The Stormhammer cannon is Strength 8, AP3, Ordnance 1, Massive Blast. So that's a 7-inch blast template. You can do some damage with it. It's gonna be a threat on the table, and at 500 points, I think you can get its traditional point value back, depending what you're doing and what else you have in your list. However, as I said, this was kind of an odd choice in my opinion for what they threw out there, but I would definitely find value in bringing it. I could have some lot of fun with it. No one's gonna scoff at the Massive Blast template, and again, you're gonna take out a lot of Marines real quickly with that AP3 when they're in power armor. So definitely some fun in there. I'm excited to see if anyone does decide to bring it, and it may make my wish list here soon.
All
What
right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Brady. Go ahead.
What I want to find a way to make this tank really work is finding a way to actually push it into the middle of the battlefield or deep strike it somehow into the middle of the battlefield. Because if you look at all its things, it also has a bunch of multi-lasers on its left and right side. So I want this to have like that old school ship feel as it's driving and just blasting everything to the left and right and forward. But what really is going to happen is you're going to take this, stick it as far back as humanly possible, and just ordnance shell. And so you're going to be losing, 6 multi-laser, whole multi-laser shots. So that's 18, I think, shots total. And you're just going to be kind of hanging it back, and you're not going to get that really cool feeling, which this kind of feels like it should have, which is, that tank moving in the middle of the field, all your dudes running behind it and using it as that absolute breaker of the opponent's army. And I don't think you're ever going to do that, which is, like, my opinion, the really disappointing part about this tank.
Oh, so close. So that's the Solar Auxilia. You guys are both, I think you've expressed some interest, both of you, in playing them. So, Brady, what does a list look like for the Solar Auxilia? And if you're playing them, what are you really trying to do and focus on?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to speak from the Space Marine perspective, because I am extremely excited to run this with my Raven Guard, because Raven Guard have a detachment specifically to bring a allied detachment of Solar Auxilia of at least 4 units. So my list is at least bringing 1,000 points or so. And what I'm looking to bring is three rifle squads of max size, so 20 each. And then I'm looking to bring 3 Leman Russes, because why would you not? And then just looking to bring some amount of extra shooting. So I'm looking to maximize bodies, because I have Space Marines to kind of do everything else. And that's what I really like about the Solar Auxilia is if you're running them as an allied detachment, you can use it as a body generator, like I am, or you can use it as, like, I just want to try to run as many tanks as I can a little bit more efficiently than Space Marine tanks. And you could, take your HQ that allows you to take your tanks and just take as many of those as you can, and it'll probably end up being Leman Rusts. I hope, not to see, 20 Leman Rusts on the table from just an allied detachment. But I think as an allied detachment, they have a lot to offer that can fill in the holes that the Space Marines have.
So this army actually really excites me. So I was looking to have a trader force or force that I could ally kind of with traders, and also to shake up the game a little bit. And this kind of offers that opportunity for me. So I normally play my Imperial Fists, but I do have a friend who plays Iron Warriors, and we are kind of combining our 2 lists together. How this looks like for me, as I said, I'm running Siege. So I'm bringing some Basilisks, I'm bringing Rapiers. I am bringing some of the veterans, Veletaris, and about 30 to 40 of the riflemen, and then 4 Leman Russ tanks, because I'm definitely bringing a command tank. And then I've been able to adjust the list to bring an assassin when I fight him, because I want to be able to bring this. We'll get those assassins later. But for me, this is a lot of templates and outflanking Leman Russ tanks to help facilitate my advance forward with all of my transports. There's a lot of blast templates going out there, and it does change up the game a little bit for what you're fighting. It brings out some different threats that you're not really seeing from the Space Marines in a lot of games right now. As I said, the artillery is not being seen. I think at the end of the day, I'm putting out 7 templates, large blast. a turn, plus anything that's coming out of the rapier battery as well. So I'm definitely bringing a different style than Brady, but I'm definitely bringing something that I think will be a lot of fun. I think it'll change up how people are fighting themselves with the Space Marines, and definitely just give something different to the Space Marine players, change how they're fighting, and enjoy seeing something different across the table.
Mike, so can you share with us the weakness of these lists? Like, if you're playing against Solar Auxilia, your regular opponent's taking them, and they just keep crushing you, what is the thing you really got to do to beat these guys?
Leadership. Honestly, that's one of their weakest points, along the same concept of, and Brady hit on it a couple times, being able to double the toughness is really easy here. And there are a fair bit of 2 wound bottles in this army that you can bring. So as an elite player, if you are bringing a more elite list, you are going to have that threat that, strength 6 is going to double tough you. So I think those are the biggest things to watch out for. This is going to be a really fun army for Night Lords to fight, particularly in my opinion, if you can't get the command boxes to work the way that you need them to. As well as anybody who does have a lot of strength 6 or above, you're going to have a much easier time with this army. But I do agree, you're going to get a lot more 4-ups than you think.
If someone said, well, Solar Auxilia is really beating me up and I don't know what to do, I would sit them down and go, okay, here are all your flamer weapons. Or more importantly, here are all your auto weapons. I'm just going to highlight those 2 sections of the book and tell them your entire list should contain those 2 weapons. Auto weapons especially are basically all going to be, strength 6 and above, so instant death. They have a fairly good rate of fire and are usually AP4 or better. So they are just ripping through all the bodies, but their higher strength usually have a rending value as well. Allows you to also pivot and hit the tanks as well. Because again, you're not seeing 14 is the highest you'll see, and that's only on the front, so you can easily just get around to the side and take out the tanks fairly easy with the strength 6, strength 7, or strength 8. So you can take that with plasma as well. And then, the really downside of Tercio is blast templates and flaming template, especially flamer templates. Because your flamer templates are going to have that higher AP. Your heavy flamer is strength 5, AP4, so it's wounding on 2s, and they're just dying, and they all have to be within an inch of each other. So you're getting a lot of models underneath that flamer template. So I would point them to those 2 areas specifically, especially because a lot of Space Marine players are not bringing, especially flamers, unless they're Death Guard. People are really sleeping on the flamer weapons, and I think Solar Auxilia will really make that flamer meta start happening. If Solar Auxilia pops off in your area, pack a couple heavy flamers.
Oh, all right. So that was the Solar Auxilia. These guys are really, really cool. I'm a big fan. I like the fact that they're doing something a little different in 30K for the human army. They're not just transplanting the 40K guard in because, well, first of all, the guard didn't exist yet, right? The Imperial Army was a very different organization during the Crusade. And I like that this is showing that. But I also like that in a meta that's going to be really like 90% Space Marines most of the time, they're trying to do something a little different that's not Space Marines, but they can compete with Space Marines on different axes. So I really like the Solar Auxilia. The one downside I'd say is that collecting Solar Auxilia is outrageously expensive. At least if you're going to use the Resin Forge World models. Although, God bless you if you're converting your own, as long as they look cool and 30K. Any final thoughts to share before we sign off, guys? Brady?
To that point, even just for my allied force, I have spent more money. In theory, my partner could hear this, so I'm not going to say the exact dollar amount. But I've spent more than I care for just 1,000 points of Solar Auxilia. So the people who have, those full forces, I want to know what job you have, because I'll go do that.
Pharmaceutical. I don't want to actually talk about the price. I will say for the listeners out there, I was also thinking about running a Warhound and a bunch of the Secutari, because I think those are amazing models, and I wanted to find a way to run them. And this costs more. And I am not doing everything resin necessarily. So it is a pricey army. It hurts the bank for sure. We'll just say it's an early Christmas present. But if you do get out there and play them, please do have some fun. This is a great, unique army to have on the field, particularly in the Horus Heresy. And as always, have fun playing.
Well, we hope you guys are enjoying our Horus Heresy content. We're going to keep covering the armies in the Liber Imperium. There's 2 other armies we haven't covered yet, plus the assassins and other kind of assorted weirdos. So keep tuned into Danger Planet for some really cool Horus Heresy content. As always, if you like this video, please give us a like. Subscribe to our channel for more great content about Horus Heresy and other great games. And if you have different thoughts on the Solar Auxilia, or maybe what Legion you'd like us to cover in the future, please drop it in the comments or come to our Discord, links in the description, and let us know. So until next time, thanks for stopping by the Danger Planet.